For 2 years, the magnificent 140-pound puma named Shadow was silent. Then a tiny kitten named Scout squeezed through a vent and wandered into the big cat's domain. That silence was shattered when an ear-splitting roar echoed across the Rocky Peak Preserve. The Rocky Peak Wildlife Preserve in the heart of Colorado is a sanctuary built on hope, but sometimes even hope seems to fail. That failure wore a coat of thick, silvery gray fur, marked with the rosettes of a true mountain phantom. His name was Shadow. 2 years ago, he arrived as an orphan cub, seized by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service after his mother was tragically killed by poachers in the rugged wilderness near Grand Teton National Forest. That trauma was too deep for his young spirit. Shadow became a creature of profound silence. He would lie on his highest observation rock, staring at the distant, jagged peaks of the Rockies, his pale eyes holding no light, no curiosity, just an empty window to a vanished past. Dr. Susan Blackwood, the sanctuary director, said his heart was a vault sealed by grief. The head keeper, Bob Johnson, had spent 1,000 hours speaking softly to the majestic cat, pleading for a sign, but Shadow remained unreachable. He was a living statue of sorrow. Then came October 17th. That morning, a small white cardboard box was found at the preserve's gate. Inside was a completely white kitten with the brightest blue eyes, a small ball of curiosity and fearlessness. They named him Scout. Scout was placed in the new quarantine facility. Dr. Blackwood's plan was to nurse him, stabilize him, and find him a loving family. But Scout, it turned out, had his own plans. He was a scout, after all. Late that afternoon, Bob was making his rounds in the large carnivore section. The sun was dipping, painting the mountains in hues of gold and rust. Suddenly, the silence of the canyons was ripped apart by a sound that made his blood run cold. It was Shadow's roar. Not the low growl of annoyance, but the full-throated, territorial scream of a mountain predator. Bob grabbed his emergency kit and sprinted towards Shadow's enclosure. His mind was racing through the terrible, inevitable scenarios. The puma was massive. The kitten was tiny. He knew with a sinking feeling that he was too late. When he reached the observation deck and looked down into the habitat, his body seized up. "Stay with us." What Bob saw next defied everything he knew about these magnificent animals. It was a sight that changed the sanctuary forever. Don't touch that dial. Shadow was perched on his favorite sun-warm rock, and curled right between his massive front paws, looking impossibly small against the puma's bulk, was the white kitten, Scout, sleeping. Bob froze. His finger hovered over the tranquilizer dart trigger. This was the moment. He had to act, but something made him pause. Shadow was not crouched. His muscles were not coiled. His tail, usually rigid with tension, was loose and gently curved around the small creature. Not like a trap, but like a boundary. He was relaxed, completely relaxed. Dr. Blackwood arrived, breathless, minutes later. She put the binoculars up. "He's not dilated, Bob," she whispered. "His pupils are normal. His respiration is slow and steady. He's passive." They watched, unable to process the image. The tiny snow-white dot of Scout was an island of peace in the presence of raw, untamed power. Then, just as the last sliver of sun vanished behind the peak, the mood shifted. Shadow's head snapped up. His eyes, usually fixed on the distant horizon of his past trauma, were now focused intently on the dense, shadowed pine line just outside his perimeter fence. His body tensed, not toward Scout, but away from him. Suddenly, Shadow rose to his full, formidable height. The puma let out another colossal, shuddering roar. It shook the observation deck. It was a sound of ultimate possessive defense. Bob shouted, "Wow, what is it? Is it another cat?" Dr. Blackwood, wide-eyed, pointed to the fence line. A pair of yellow eyes, a coyote, a familiar, opportunistic predator in the foothills of Colorado, was slinking away from the enclosure. The coyote had spotted the tiny, defenseless kitten. Shadow hadn't roared in 2 years. The first sound he uttered was a warning not for himself, but for the tiny creature he had instinctively claimed. As the coyote disappeared, Shadow slowly settled back onto the rock. Scout, who had been momentarily startled, stretched and then immediately nestled back into the Puma's thick fur. Then the final, heart-stopping sound. Shadow lowered his enormous head, touched his nose to the top of Scout's head, and released a soft, rumbling vibration. A sound Bob knew from the research books, but had never heard in person: the Puma's chuff. The gentle, non-threatening vocalization used to greet and comfort. The majestic, heartbroken creature had found his voice, and that voice was one of unconditional love. The impossible partnership was a reality, but reality, especially at a government-sanctioned facility, comes with protocols. Safety had to be paramount. The next morning, the separation was agonizing. They installed a thick, clear acrylic barrier dividing the habitat. Scout could still see Shadow, could still smell him, but could not touch him. It was a necessary cruelty. The separation was mandatory, but what happened over the next 48 hours proved that Shadow's recovery depended on the kitten's presence. Wait until you hear the secret trauma he carried from Grand Teton. It will change everything. The staff watched as Shadow abandoned his high rock. For 2 days, he pressed his face against the cold, clear barrier, his massive frame motionless. Scout, on the other side, cried relentlessly. They were two broken halves separated by glass. They were showing signs of distress so profound that Dr. Blackwood called an emergency board meeting. The debate was fierce: safety, liability, the mission. But Dr. Blackwood stood firm. We cannot unbreak a heart we just started to heal. Scout is not just an animal, he is a psychiatric intervention. We choose hope. The board relented. The barrier was removed. The reunion was immediate and overwhelming. Scout launched himself onto Shadow's head, purring so loudly that the rumbling could be heard from the observation deck. Shadow responded with a symphony of gentle chuffs and began grooming the tiny cat with his massive tongue, exercising unimaginable control. But the true proof of the bond came the next morning. It revealed a generosity that was simply unprecedented. Bob came for feeding time. He placed Shadow's enormous, delicious cut of venison, a true prize for any mountain cat, and then placed Scout's small bowl of kitten food nearby. Shadow, usually ravenous, didn't eat. He waited. When Scout approached his bowl, Shadow nudged the large piece of venison with his nose. He didn't offer the whole piece. He used his canine tooth to gently scrape off a tiny sliver of raw meat, a microscopic bite, and deliberately pushed it across the rock toward Scout's bowl. Scout, confused, sniffed the big bloody piece of meat, then went back to his kibble. Shadow waited another moment, then slowly, carefully, lowered his head and began to eat his venison, all while Scout nestled close, purring his approval. It was an offering, a ritual, the shared meal. Shadow had only eaten once Scout was fed and protected. This bond was the key, and it explained the full extent of Shadow's isolation. It was the trauma of the Grand Teton scar. Shadow had not only been orphaned, but he also carried the crushing anxiety of abandonment. The staff revealed a secret. 6 months after his arrival, when his physical health was stable, Dr. Blackwood had attempted a soft release. They had driven him back to the familiar, pine-scented air of the mountains, not far from the Grand Teton. They placed his transport crate near the gate, ready to open it and let him reclaim his life. Shadow had walked out of the crate, paused at the threshold of the open gate, and looked out. He looked at the vast, green landscape. He looked at the majestic, cruel beauty of the mountains. And he froze. Dr. Blackwood watched, heart-wrenching, as the young Puma stood there for 3 hours. He took one step out, then immediately retreated back into the cold, metal safety of the crate. He refused to leave. He wasn't afraid of the wild. He was afraid of being alone in it. The terror of losing the next thing was greater than the desire for freedom. Shadow knew the mountains could take away what he loved. But Scout had crawled through a tiny ventilation vent to find him. Scout had chosen him. This tiny white spirit was the proof that sometimes what you lose can be given back to you. The Puma's fear of abandonment vanished. He was a protector now. He had purpose. The partnership became a powerful symbol. The sanctuary installed new safety features, platforms designed for a small cat, hidden escape routes, and AI monitoring. They were allowing this impossible family to thrive. As the Colorado winter descended, Shadow's transformation was breathtaking. He started to play, batting at enrichment toys he had ignored for 2 years. He even started scent marking his territory, the ultimate sign of a confident, secure predator. Scout was always nearby, either riding on Shadow's massive back through the deep snow or nestled in his fur for warmth. One particularly cold night, when the temperature plunged, Shadow did something else amazing. He had always refused to use the indoor heated cave, but on this night he stood up, chuffed softly to wake Scout, and then deliberately walked to the mouth of the cave. He paused, looking back, ensuring the small cat was following. Shadow became the guardian, making real-time decisions for the welfare of his charge. The bond was beautiful, but was it strong enough to survive separation? The ultimate test was coming, and what followed proved the heartbreaking necessity of their connection. This is the moment Shadow's healing almost broke. Then came October again, a year after they met. Scout developed a serious respiratory infection. Dr. Matthews, the vet, determined the kitten needed several days of intensive care in the clinic, completely separate from Shadow. The separation was unavoidable. The staff prepared for the stress, but no one prepared for the grief. The moment Scout was gently coaxed into a carrier and taken out through the main gate, Shadow instantly knew. His body went from relaxed to rigid. He started pacing, issuing urgent, questioning chuffs. As Bob carried the small carrier toward the exit, Shadow followed the chain-link fence as far as he could, staying precisely parallel to the gate. When the door closed behind Scout, Shadow stopped. He didn't roar. He didn't pace. He simply stood at the empty gate and released a sound none of the experienced staff had ever heard. It was a cry of profound, unbearable sorrow. The next 3 days were a descent back into darkness. Shadow refused to eat. He refused to drink. He ignored the enrichment toys. He stopped using his observation rock. He spent all his time lying at the cold metal gate where Scout had vanished, his pale eyes once again fixed on the distant peaks, empty of light. Dr. Blackwood was frantic. His stress hormones are spiking. His trauma is resurfacing. If we lose the bond, we will lose him entirely. Shadow was regressing so fast they feared he would starve himself back to the creature of silence he once was. The life Scout had brought him was the only thing holding the Puma together. On the third night, Dr. Matthews called Dr. Blackwood. Scout was not 100%, but he was stable. "Sue," she said, "we have to bring him home. Shadow is dying of a broken heart." The reunion was chaotic, beautiful, and deeply cathartic. When Bob carried the carrier into the enclosure and opened the door, Scout launched himself out. He ran full speed across the habitat and slammed into Shadow's massive chest. The Puma erupted in a frenzy of gentle chuffs. He pinned Scout, not aggressively, but carefully, and began to groom him with a desperate thoroughness, as if physically checking every single hair, every tiny paw, to ensure his charge was whole. Scout pressed his small body into Shadow's fur and purred loudly, a steady, warm counter rhythm to the Puma's rapid breathing. For several minutes, they were oblivious to the world. Shadow was home. Scout was safe. The silence was broken, replaced by the steady, powerful heartbeat of family. The incident proved that the bond was not merely cute or accidental, it was fundamental to Shadow's psychological survival. Their relationship was now the single greatest factor in his health. The following spring, with the help of a generous, anonymous grant, the sanctuary unveiled a new, state-of-the-art habitat. It was 3 times the size, designed specifically for a Puma and a small domestic cat. It featured complex climbing structures, water features, and a towering, rugged rock face, the kind of challenging terrain Shadow would have known in Grand Teton. But the most powerful moment wasn't when they were reunited. The ultimate test of Shadow's devotion came when Scout faced a danger no one had anticipated. It was the final victory of love over trauma. In June, a heat wave hit Colorado. Shadow, despite his thick coat, was active, using the new climbing structures to survey his domain. Scout naturally followed. One afternoon, Scout decided to scale the highest point of the new, massive rock face. He climbed until he reached a section where the distance between the ledges was just too great for his small frame. He was stranded, high up, unable to move up or down, exposed to the summer sun. He started to cry. Not the confident meow he used with Shadow, but small, frantic, distressed chirps. Shadow was resting in the shade, 50 feet away. He heard the sound. His head lifted. He assessed the tiny white speck caught high on the sheer rock face. He didn't hesitate. The 140-pound Puma sprang to his feet. He covered the 50 feet in 3 massive bounds, landing directly at the base of the rock face. Then he began to climb. He moved with painstaking slowness, his powerful legs working the ledges. He was deliberate, focused entirely on the small, crying sound above him. He climbed until he was positioned just beneath the terrified kitten. Then, with an impossible display of control and problem-solving, Shadow slowly, cautiously adjusted his massive body. He lowered his flank, a smooth, furry bridge, and then held absolutely still, his entire body trembling slightly with the effort of holding the unnatural position. He had created a ramp, a lifeline. Scout, sensing the familiar safety of the Puma's fur, scrambled onto Shadow's back and used the Puma's shoulder to hop down onto the next safe ledge. Shadow waited, then followed the kitten back down, never moving too fast, always providing a solid shield. When they reached the bottom, Scout shook himself off and immediately rubbed his head against Shadow's face, purring his thanks. Shadow had assessed the danger, calculated the risk, created the solution, and executed a physical rescue that required total mastery over his immense, dangerous power. He had chosen cognitive devotion over simple instinct. That moment was the final, definitive answer. The trauma was not forgotten, but the silence had been broken by an unbreakable, protective love. In December, the Sanctuary Board gathered one final time. Dr. Blackwood presented the data. Shadow's stress hormones were now in the optimal range. His cognitive function had surpassed all expectations. Scout was thriving, a healthy, happy cat. The board's decision was unanimous. Shadow and Scout would remain together permanently. Their bond was recognized as a legitimate family unit, deserving the same respect and protection afforded to any parent and offspring. As the years passed, the scene became the preserve's constant, quiet miracle. A massive, powerful Puma, the king of his mountain habitat, would wake up. He would climb his high rock, looking out over the peaks of Colorado that had once represented his solitude. And beside him, nestled safe and sound, was a small white Maine Coon mix, purring softly. Shadow, the silence-shattered Puma, had lost his mother to the cruelty of man. Scout, the brave little cat, had been abandoned by the negligence of man. Both had found in the other exactly what the human world had taken away: family, hope, and an unwavering promise of protection. And in that moment, in the quiet majesty of the Rocky Peak Preserve, with the Puma's long tail curled gently around his tiny companion, the magnificent creature who had spent 730 days in silence was finally, unequivocally, home. If this story of unbelievable love and resilience inspired you, please tell us in the comments below. What animal connection changed your life? And don't miss our next story of miraculous rescue. Click right here to subscribe and watch us.